I'm Clarice Bennett, 66 years old, and last month, I sat in a hospital bed while my only son signed papers to sell my house. The same house I was raised in, the house where he took his first steps and said his first word. He said it was for my own good, that I was too old to live alone anymore, that I needed full-time care. He even found me a room in a place called Golden Oak, with cheerful wallpaper and round-the-clock nurses. But what he didn't know was that the house wasn't his to sell, and that his father still held the key to stopping him. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to fight for the life you built with your own two hands. I've lived in Dallas my entire life, born on a quiet block lined with elm trees and wide porches. My parents raised me in the same two-story house I live in now. They were modest people, steady kind. My father worked maintenance for the city, and my mother taught Sunday school on the corner of 8th and Grove. We didn't have much, but we always had clean clothes, a warm meal, and room at the table for whoever needed it. I went to a local college on scholarship, earned my degree in urban planning, and spent the next 32 years helping the city grow. I've worked on every kind of project, from historic park restorations to the bike trails that loop through downtown. Now that I'm older, I can see how much of my life I poured into this place, and how much of it I gave up for my son. His name is Evan. He's 39 now, married 5 years to a woman named Hannah. She teaches literature at a private school, and has a way of speaking that always makes me feel like I've shown up to dinner wearing the wrong decade's clothes. Evan used to bring me wildflowers from the yard when he was little. He'd cry if I didn't tuck him in myself every night. But something changed when he got married, something I still don't fully understand. That Sunday started like most others. I woke up early, took my insulin, checked my blood sugar. It was high, but not dangerously so. The morning sun poured in through the tall windows across my mother's old wooden floors. I had my usual plain oatmeal and tea, then dressed for work. Even though it was the weekend, I still liked to keep my routines around noon. Evan called. Said he and Hannah wanted to stop by and show me photos from their trip to Europe. They'd just gotten back from Florence and Paris. I offered to cook dinner. He said no, they'd already eaten. They just wanted to drop by for a little while. They arrived an hour later. Hannah walked in first, crisp white blouse, gold earrings, hair perfect as ever. She barely glanced at me before commenting on my living room, said the rugs looked like museum pieces. Evan just smiled thinly, like he couldn't decide whose side to be on. I listened to them describe ancient cathedrals and riverside cafes, while the roast chicken I'd made sat untouched in the kitchen. Hannah handed me a notebook with the Eiffel Tower on the cover, said it was a souvenir from Paris. It still had the price sticker on the back. Then Evan leaned forward and said there was something they wanted to talk to me about, something important, and that's when everything began to shift. Evan cleared his throat and leaned forward, fingers laced tight in his lap. Mom, Hannah, and I think it's time we talk about your future, about the house, about you living alone. I didn't say anything. I just waited. He glanced at his wife, who took that as her cue. We've been doing some research, Hannah said, smoothing a wrinkle from her skirt that wasn't there. There's a lovely senior living community just outside the city. Beautiful gardens, on-site medical care. They even offer painting classes and wellness walks. It's called Golden Oak. I looked at them both, then down at my hands. You'd have people around all the time, Evan added, his voice overly gentle. No more worrying about slipping on the stairs or forgetting to take your medication. I haven't forgotten my medication, I said. I know, he replied quickly. But things happen. We just want to be proactive. Hannah nodded, her expression soft but firm. The house is too much for one person. The upkeep, the yard work, the stairs, it's a lot. And you deserve to enjoy your retirement. I enjoy it here, I said. This is my home. Evan gave a sigh, like he'd been expecting that. We just want what's best for you, Mom. You've spent your whole life taking care of other people. It's time someone took care of you. They stayed for another 20 minutes, talking around the subject without saying much more. I noticed Evan didn't touch the photo albums he'd brought. When they left, the chicken still sat untouched on the counter. I wrapped it in foil and placed it in the fridge. Then I stood in the living room, the quiet settling around me like dust. The next morning, I woke up feeling strange, dizzy, nauseous, lightheaded. My blood sugar was dangerously high. I called the clinic and they told me to come in immediately. I packed a small overnight bag just in case, though I didn't yet know I'd be away for the week. Dr. Reynolds ran the tests himself. After an hour, he came back into the exam room with a serious look on his face and sat down. "Clarice, you're in the early stages of diabetic ketoacidosis," he said. "You need to be admitted today. No delay." "I can't stay in the hospital," I told him. "I have work. I have meetings tomorrow." "You can't afford to push this off," he said, already signing the admission papers. "This is serious." By late afternoon, I was in a hospital bed with an IV in my arm. The ceiling tiles above me were a soft beige, the kind that made everything feel quieter than it really was. A nurse named Patricia brought me water, fluffed my pillow, and introduced herself as my day nurse. She spoke gently but firmly, the way people do when they're used to coaxing stubborn patients into resting. I called Evan to let him know. He answered on the third ring, distracted. "Hey, Mom, I've only got a minute." "Big meeting in 5. "I'm in the hospital," I said. He went silent. "What?" My blood sugar spiked. "They admitted me a few hours ago." "Which hospital?" "Methodist. Endocrinology, 6th floor. He didn't say much else. Promised he and Hannah would stop by that evening. Asked if I needed anything from home. I gave him a short list: my robe, my slippers, the paperback I'd been reading, and he said he'd bring them. They came just after 7. Hannah carried a small shopping bag and placed it carefully on the side table. Evan stood at the foot of the bed, arms crossed over his chest. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Better," I said. "Still tired. This is exactly what we were worried about." Hannah said, sitting on the edge of the chair beside me. "You're lucky it wasn't worse." I didn't respond. I knew what she was really saying. "This is why we wanted to talk to you about Golden Oak," Evan added. "They'd monitor you daily. Meals, medication, everything would be taken care of." "I'm not going to a nursing home," I said quietly. "Mom, it's not a nursing home," Hannah replied too quickly. "It's independent living. You'd still have your space, your independence. Just with support." I turned my head and looked out the window. The sun had gone down, but the streetlights were beginning to flicker on in the hospital parking lot. "We've already scheduled a tour," Evan said. "This weekend. Just to look." I didn't answer. After they left, I laid there a long time, listening to the sounds of the hospital, the rolling carts, the distant beeps, the murmur of voices in the hallway. At some point, I must have dozed off, because the next thing I remember was waking to the sound of voices just outside my room. I recognized Evan's first. "It's the perfect time," he said. "She's clearly not able to manage on her own anymore." "She's stubborn," Hannah whispered back. "But if we act now, we can have everything in place by the time she's discharged." "What about the house?" I spoke to a realtor. "With a little updating, it could go fast. It's in a great neighborhood." "I don't know, Hannah. It's my childhood home." "Exactly," she said. "It's your inheritance. And it's too much for her now. You saw how run down the porch is. We could use the money to fund the bookstore, and still have enough for her care." There was a pause. Then Evan spoke again, his voice lower. "You're right. Let's just get it done. I'll talk to her tomorrow." I kept my eyes closed as they walked in, pretending I'd just woken up. Evan smiled too wide. "Hey, Mom, how are you feeling?" "Better," I said. "Tired? We brought you some fruit," Hannah added, setting a small basket on the tray table. "Though I'm not sure if it's allowed." I nodded, not reaching for it. Evan sat down and leaned forward. We were thinking, once you're out of here, we'll move you directly into Golden Oak. They've already got a room ready. Nice view, private bath, and the house I asked. He blinked. We're just getting things started, having it appraised. No pressure. There's something you didn't consider, I said. What's that? I looked him in the eye. The house is part of a family trust. It can't be sold without all beneficiaries' consent. He looked confused. What trust? Your grandfather set it up. Before he passed. Your father is still listed on it. So is Uncle Frank and his children. And you. I don't remember any of that, he said, frowning. You wouldn't. You were 15 when it was signed. The documents are in the desk drawer upstairs. Blue folder labeled Hampshire Family Trust. He was quiet for a long time. That's a complication, he said finally. Yes, I replied. He stood, rubbed his hand over his face. Hannah looked between us, her jaw tight. We'll talk later, she said, pulling her coat over her shoulders. We're just trying to help. They left shortly after. That night, I picked up my phone and stared at it for a while before dialing. When he answered, his voice was calm, familiar. Clarice. Hi, Garrison. I need your help. I paused. It's about the house. He didn't hesitate. I'll be there in 3 days. I set the phone down, folded my hands in my lap, and waited for morning. I stayed 2 more nights in the hospital, long enough for the medication to bring my blood sugar back under control. Nurses came and went, always kind, always busy. Meals arrived on plastic trays with little notes listing calories and carb counts. I ate quietly, washed my face in the mornings, kept my hair brushed. I knew Evan wouldn't stop pushing. I just didn't know how far he'd already gone. On the 3rd afternoon, a young nurse with blonde curls stepped in with a clipboard in hand. You're all set for discharge tomorrow, Ms. Bennett. Your room at Golden Oak will be ready by noon. I sat up straighter. Excuse me? She looked up, blinking. That's what your son requested. We received the documents this morning. He's arranged private transportation and signed the admission forms. I kept my voice calm. Did he sign them on my behalf? She hesitated. He said you'd already agreed, that it was all taken care of. I thanked her and asked to speak with the attending physician. She nodded and slipped out of the room, the door closing quietly behind her. I didn't wait. I reached into the side drawer and pulled out my phone. I called Evan first. He didn't answer. Then I called Golden Oak. The woman on the other end was polite but firm. Yes, they had my room ready. Yes, my son had handled the paperwork. No, I hadn't signed anything personally, but she said these things are often handled by family. I asked her to cancel the move immediately. She said I'd need to submit that in writing. I asked for her email. When Dr. Reynolds came in, I told him I wasn't going to Golden Oak and that I would be discharging home. He didn't argue, just said he'd make the necessary notes and clear me for release. That evening, I sat up in bed and called the house. Hannah answered. Her voice was clipped. Is Evan home? I asked. He's resting, she said. It's been a long few days. Did you sign admission forms in my name? She paused. We did what we had to do. Without my consent? She didn't answer. I'll be returning home tomorrow, I said. Please make sure the house is as I left it. The line went quiet, then disconnected. That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought about the kitchen table where Evan used to sit with a crayon in each hand, coloring the same picture over and over. I thought about the summer he broke his wrist and cried until I let him sleep in my bed for a week. I thought about the time he lost his job in Atlanta and came home for 6 months, and how I kept the lights on and the fridge full while he figured things out. I didn't expect gratitude, but I never expected this. By morning, my chart had been signed, my bag was packed, and a rideshare was waiting downstairs. I climbed in slowly, easing into the back seat with care. The driver glanced in the mirror, asked if I needed the air adjusted, then pulled onto the freeway toward home. We turned onto Grove Avenue just after 9. The morning light was soft across the rooftops. My house sat at the far end of the block, its porch half shaded by the same elm trees my father planted the year I was born. Something was wrong before we even pulled into the driveway. A white SUV I didn't recognize was parked out front. 2 people were on the porch, one carrying a clipboard, the other with a toolbox. The front door was propped open. My door. The driver slowed to a stop. I asked him to wait. I climbed out, walked up the path, and stood on the porch. "Can I help you?" I asked. The woman with the clipboard turned. "We're from Martin and Lake Real Estate. Your son scheduled a consultation. We're assessing the property for listing." "I didn't approve any listing," I said. She blinked. "We were told the property was being vacated today." "It's not. I live here." "Please leave." They didn't argue. She muttered an apology and gathered her things. The man with the toolbox followed her down the steps. I stepped into my house. The front room was different. The rug was rolled up in the corner. My framed cross-stitch had been taken off the wall. Boxes lined the hallway. A faint citrus cleaner smell hung in the air, sharp and unfamiliar. In the kitchen, I found Hannah wrapping up dishes in newspaper. She turned when she saw me. "You weren't supposed to be here until noon." "I changed my plans," I said. She stood brushing her hands on her jeans. "Evan's not home. I didn't come to see Evan." She stared at me. "We've already started packing. You're making this harder than it needs to be. You need to leave. This house is dangerous for someone your age. The stairs, the wiring, the uneven porch. It's my home." She didn't answer. I walked past her and into the dining room. My grandmother's china cabinet was half empty. A roll of bubble wrap sat on the floor. I picked up the house phone and dialed Garrison. He answered on the second ring. "Just landed." I exhaled. "Come straight here. I'm already in the rental." 10 minutes out. When he arrived, I was still in the living room. Hannah had gone upstairs. The front door opened, and Garrison stepped in taller than I remembered, wearing a brown jacket and a tired smile. He looked around the room, then at me. "I should have come sooner," he said. "You're here now." He nodded, took off his coat, and hung it on the back of a chair. "Where's Evan?" "Not here." "Good." He looked around again. They really started without asking. I nodded. "Do you have the trust documents in the drawer upstairs?" "Blue folder." He headed up to retrieve them. A few minutes later, he came back down with the folder in hand. "Still valid, still binding." "Will you help me stop them?" He looked me in the eye. "I already have." We sat together at the kitchen table, the same one where we used to drink coffee before church on Sundays. Garrison opened the folder, spread the documents out, and pointed to the section about property restrictions. "They can't sell without majority consent. You me Frank's boys. It's locked. Can we file a block? I'll do it first thing in the morning." We sat in silence for a while. The clock in the hallway ticked steadily. Upstairs, a door closed. Garrison stood. "Want me to talk to her?" "No," I said. "I will." I climbed the stairs slowly, one hand on the banister, the other brushing against the wall out of habit. At the top, I paused. The door to the guest room was open. I found Hannah inside, folding towels into a box that didn't belong to me. She didn't turn when I stepped in. "Evan said you'd try to fight this," she said, smoothing the towel flat. "But I didn't think you'd actually drag in lawyers." I stood in the doorway. "He's not a lawyer. He's family." She finally turned to face me. "It doesn't matter. This isn't about feelings, Clarice. It's about safety and logic. Then let's talk plainly, I said. You filed admission papers to move me into a facility. You scheduled a real estate team to walk through my house while I was still in the hospital. You packed my belongings without my permission. And now you're standing in my home, folding my linens, like any of that is normal. Her mouth tightened. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Am I? This house is falling apart. The windows leak. The roof hasn't been replaced in decades. You can't even get up the stairs without holding onto the rail. I've been getting up those stairs for 65 years, I said, including the years I carried Evan in my arms. She didn't respond. I won't ask again, I said. Pack up your things and leave. She blinked, then stepped forward, shoulders squared. Evan's name is on the trust, and that doesn't give him control. You know that now. Her jaw clenched. She didn't speak, just brushed past me and disappeared down the hall. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, the front door opening, then closing. I stayed there a while longer, in the room that used to belong to Evan when he was little. The wallpaper had changed, but I could still see the faint lines where his baseball posters had been taped up. Downstairs, Garrison was still sitting at the table. He looked up when I walked in, gave me a nod. Everything all right for now? He tapped the folder again. We'll file the injunction in the morning. That'll freeze any attempts to sell or transfer the property. Good. Evan's going to push back. I know. He slid the folder toward me. You'll need to talk to Frank's boys, too. They have voting rights. I haven't spoken to Dean or Charlie in years. I can reach out, he said. They always liked you. The room fell quiet. Outside, the elm trees shifted in the breeze, their leaves brushing against the window panes. Later that afternoon, I walked out to the back porch. The swing was still there, though the cushion had faded from years of sun. I sat down, felt the soft creak of the chains above me, and looked out across the yard. The roses were starting to bloom again, the ones my mother planted the year Evan was born. I stayed out there until dusk, then came inside and made a simple dinner: scrambled eggs, toast, a few slices of tomato. Garrison stayed in the guest room that night. Neither of us said much. The silence felt like something shared, not something heavy. The next morning, we were at the courthouse by 9. The clerk stamped the injunction paperwork, then walked it upstairs to be processed. By noon, the notice was official. No property transfer, listing, or sale could be executed without signatures from all named parties. We stood outside on the courthouse steps afterward. Garrison tucked the paperwork into his briefcase. What now? I asked. Now we wait for their next move. It came faster than I expected. That evening, Evan showed up unannounced. I heard his car in the driveway and opened the door before he could knock. He stepped inside, his face, pale, jaw tight. You had no right, he said. I had every right. You went behind my back. You went behind mine first. He closed his eyes, then opened them again. Do you know how much Hannah and I have put into this plan? How many hours we spent researching care facilities, talking to realtors, lining up resources? I know exactly how much. Because you did it without me. You weren't thinking clearly, Mom. The hospital stay was temporary. You could fall. You could burn something on the stove. I could live. Here, as I always have. He stepped forward, hands out. This is irrational. You're being emotional. No, I said. I'm being clear. He stared at me for a long time. Then his voice dropped. You had Garrison file an injunction. I did. And you told the realtor to back off. Yes. And what about Frank's sons? They're being contacted. He nodded once, then turned toward the door. If this is how you want it, it is. He opened the door, then looked back. Don't expect us to clean up the mess when you can't keep up anymore. I won't. The door closed behind him. That night, I stood in the kitchen, wiping down the counters, the rhythm of the cloth steady in my hands. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. I just felt still. In the living room, Garrison sat on the sofa reading an old book he'd found on the shelf. He looked up when I walked in. "They'll try something else," he said. "I know." He nodded slowly. "But you're ready now." I looked around the room at the framed photos, the familiar furniture, the chipped tile by the fireplace that we never did fix. I walked to the window and looked out into the yard. "I think I am," I said. 2 days after Evan left the house settled back into its quiet rhythms. I dusted the picture frames, changed the sheets in the guest room, watered the rose bushes out back. Garrison stayed another night, then headed back to Raleigh, with a promise to return if anything shifted. The injunction held. The calls stopped. For the first time in weeks, I could hear the tick of the kitchen clock without my chest tightening. The following morning, I drove myself to the pharmacy. It felt good to get behind the wheel again. The air was warm, a breeze stirring through the open windows. I parked near the front, walked in steady, and picked up my medication. A young woman at the counter complimented my earrings, small silver hoops I'd worn for years, and I smiled as I thanked her. On the way out, I stopped for a carton of milk and some apples, just enough to fill the fridge without overdoing it. Everything felt a little lighter. That afternoon, I sat on the porch and wrote 2 letters. The first was to Dean, the second to Charlie. Both were Frank's sons, my nephews by marriage, but I hadn't seen them since their father's memorial. I told them what had happened. I explained the trust, the sale, the injunction. I didn't beg. I didn't accuse. I just asked them to remember who their Uncle Harold and I had been and to help me protect what we'd built. I mailed the letters at the post office before dinner time. The next 3 days passed without word. Then on Saturday, I heard gravel crunching in the driveway. A dusty blue pickup pulled in. The door opened and a man stepped out. Broad shoulders, gray at the temples. I recognized him before he reached the porch. "Dean," I said. He grinned. Took me a minute to believe the letter was real. I stepped aside to let him in. "Come in." I made coffee. We sat in the kitchen, the same table where his father used to rest his elbows and talk politics with Harold until the sun went down. Dean stirred his coffee with one hand and glanced around the room. "Place hasn't changed much," he said. "Not in ways that matter." He nodded. "Charlie's coming tomorrow. We'll vote with you." Relief didn't come like a wave. It came slow, quiet, like air returning to a room that's been sealed too long. I reached across the table and touched his hand. "Thank you. We know what this house means. My dad used to say it was the backbone of the family. That's what we built it to be." He looked me square in the eye. "Evan's smart, but he's playing short-term games. You're not." After he left, I went upstairs and pulled the quilt down from the cedar chest at the end of the bed, the one Harold's mother had sewn by hand. I aired it out on the line, then brought it back in before the dew. That night, I slept under it for the first time in years. The next morning, Charlie arrived with a handshake and a nod. He didn't stay long, just signed the papers Garrison had emailed over, then tipped his cap and promised to stay in touch. That was all it took. The balance had shifted. By noon, Garrison called. "That's 4 signatures locked in. You're protected. They can't override it. Even if they try, they'd need a unanimous vote from the beneficiaries to challenge the injunction." "That's not happening." I thanked him, then hung up and stood by the window. Outside the neighborhood, kids were riding bikes along the sidewalk, their voices high and tangled with laughter. I hadn't realized how quiet the house had gotten without that sound. It felt like life was pressing gently back in. That afternoon, I called the lawyer listed on the trust. He confirmed Garrison's reading of the terms. As long as I was alive and capable, the property could not be touched without majority consent. I asked him to send a formal copy to Evan and Hannah. He said he would. The letter must have arrived by Wednesday because that's when Evan came by again. He didn't knock this time, just walked straight in through the front door. I was in the living room folding laundry. "You really did it," he said, holding up the envelope. "I did. You called Dean and Charlie. They called me." He shook his head. "You're putting everything at risk over a house that's going to fall apart around you." "It's not about the house," I said. "It's about how you went about this." He looked down at the floor, then back at me. "So, what now? We just go back to pretending nothing happened." "No, but we don't have to stay enemies either." He didn't reply, just stood there, the letter still in his hand. I pointed to the laundry basket. "If you're going to stand there, at least hand me that towel." He picked it up, handed it over. I folded it once, then again, and placed it neatly in the pile. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "You really aren't going to leave this place, are you?" "No," I said. "I'm not." He left without another word. That night, I made soup from scratch. The kitchen filled with the scent of carrots, thyme, and roasted garlic. I ate alone, but the silence no longer felt like absence. It felt like space. The next week passed with fewer interruptions. Evan didn't come by. Hannah didn't call. I kept to my routine morning walks to the mailbox, light cleaning letters answered in the afternoon soup on the stove by evening. The quiet didn't feel permanent, but it gave me room to think. One morning, I took the bus into town. I had an errand at the bank, just a routine update to some paperwork, but while I was there, the woman at the counter paused after typing my name. She frowned and clicked around the screen. "I'm sorry," she said. "Did you authorize a transfer from your trust account last week? I hadn't." I told her so. She looked relieved and called over a manager. Together, they printed out the activity. There it was, an attempted withdrawal request for $15,000 submitted under Evan's name using credentials tied to a digital login. I asked them to freeze all linked accounts until I could speak to my lawyer. The manager nodded. "You caught this in time." Nothing cleared. By the time I got home, Garrison had already returned my call. I told him what happened. "That's fraud," he said. "It could lead to serious consequences for Evan." "He hasn't taken anything yet," I said. "That doesn't matter." He tried. "Do you want to press charges?" I sat in the kitchen, the receiver warm in my hand. Outside, wind moved through the trees, soft and steady. "Not yet," I said. "All right, but I'm flagging the trust documents. We'll require in-person verification for anything going forward. Thank you." That evening, I sat on the porch and watched the sun move lower behind the trees. The roses were in full bloom now, their petals pale and wide, their scent carried on the breeze. Just before dusk, a silver SUV pulled into the driveway. Evan stepped out a folder tucked under his arm. I stayed seated. He approached the porch slowly. "Mom," he said, "I want to talk." I nodded toward the other chair. He didn't sit. He stood at the edge of the step, hands tied on the folder. "I know you were at the bank. They called me," I said. "I didn't think it would go through," he said. "It was just Hannah and I. We're stretched thin. Her parents had another medical bill come through, and I didn't speak." He shifted. "We didn't mean for it to come out of your account. It was just supposed to be a temporary hold. We were going to cover it by Friday." I waited. "I know I shouldn't have done it," he said. I panicked. I watched the light shift across his face. The same face I'd rocked to sleep 35 years ago. The same mouth that once called for me from the edge of the sandbox, hands covered in dirt. He opened the folder, pulled out a sheaf of papers. "We've spoken with another lawyer. He says if we petition the court, we might be able to restructure the trust. If we claim you're being manipulated by whom I asked. By Garrison, by Dean, by whoever's convincing you to fight us. No one's convincing me, I said. I made this decision myself. I don't believe that. Then that's your burden. His mouth opened, then closed again. He looked down at the papers, then set them on the porch railing. If this gets ugly, he said, you can't say I didn't warn you. I stood. You used to build forts in this yard. Remember that? He looked up startled. You used to dig holes, drag branches, pull the garden hose across the lawn. You'd spend hours shaping the ground into something that felt like home, something that belonged to you. He didn't answer. Now you're trying to level the place. He didn't pick up the papers, just walked back to the car and drove off. I left the folder where it sat. The breeze caught one of the loose pages and carried it into the yard. I didn't chase it. The next day, Garrison called again. I had a bad feeling, he said. Evan's lawyer filed a petition. They're claiming diminished capacity. I sat at the kitchen table, my palm resting flat on the wood grain. So they're saying I can't think for myself. They're trying to open a medical review. If it goes to court, you'll need to be evaluated. I closed my eyes for a moment. Fine, I said. Let them. I'll schedule the assessment. We'll make sure it's handled professionally. The court date was set for the following Friday. I spent the week gathering documents, doctor's records, vision exams, proof of recent physicals. Garrison arranged for a geriatric psychologist to conduct a full cognitive assessment. It took 3 hours. Word recall, problem-solving memory tests, coordination drills. The doctor kind eyes behind thick glasses shook my hand at the end. You're as sharp as a tack, he said. Thank you. In court, Evan sat beside his lawyer, his face unreadable. Hannah wasn't there. Garrison presented the medical evidence, first signed reports, evaluation results, statements from 2 physicians. The judge flipped through the folder slowly, then looked at Evan. Do you have anything else to add? Evan hesitated, then shook his head. The judge nodded once. Petition denied. Outside, the sky was a hard, bright blue. I stood beside Garrison on the courthouse steps. He glanced sideways. They're not going to stop, but they won't win. I looked out at the street where a couple walked by with a dog on a leash, the kind with ears too big for its body and legs that moved too fast. They already lost the most important thing, I said. It was quiet for a few days after the court ruling. No more emails from Evan, no calls from Hannah. Garrison said their lawyer had gone silent, which meant one of 2 things: they were either regrouping or retreating. I didn't ask which. I used the time to clean out the attic. It hadn't been touched in years. I found old holiday boxes, broken ornaments, yellowed photo albums. Near the back corner was a crate sealed with duct tape. Inside were Dean's files, his discharge papers, insurance records, and a thick folder marked VA housing benefits. Tucked inside was a copy of the property deed from 1983. My name was listed, but so was Dean's, held jointly. Right below that was the clause Dean had insisted on adding when we refinanced 15 years ago: full transfer rights pass to surviving spouse only if no successor challenges ownership. I brought the file downstairs and called Garrison. He read through the document slowly, then let out a soft breath. They never saw this, he said. It's airtight. If Evan moves against you again, we'll file a protective order on the property. This clause blocks any third-party transfer without your approval. That night, I sat on the porch with the papers spread across the table. It had been months since I'd touched anything of Dean's. Seeing his signature on the page felt like hearing his voice again, calm and steady. He always said the house was part of our family, I think he knew what was coming before I did. The next morning, I printed 3 copies of the deed and the VA agreement. I mailed one to the county clerk's office, one to Garrison, and the third I kept in the safe with my birth certificate and Dean's flag. Later that afternoon, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Hannah standing there, a tote bag over her shoulder, sunglasses on her head. She looked tired. "I wanted to speak to you," she said. I stepped aside. She came in without looking around. "I didn't know about the second trust," she said, "or the bank account Dean set up. Evan told me everything was settled, that you were moving into a care facility and that the house was going up for sale." I nodded, but didn't interrupt. "We've been fighting more lately. About money. About what happened in court." She paused. "He's not handling it well." I waited. She opened the tote bag and pulled out a thick envelope. "This is everything," she said. "The power of attorney documents, the sale agreement, the court filings. I made copies for myself. I don't want them in the house anymore." I took the envelope and set it on the side table. She looked around, her eyes landing briefly on the framed photo of Dean above the fireplace. "He didn't deserve this," she said quietly. "Neither did you." I didn't know what to say. She stood. "I'm going to stay with my sister in Houston for a while. I don't know what's going to happen with Evan, but I wanted you to have the documents in case he tries anything else." I walked her to the door. Before she left, she turned. "You built something good here. I see that now." She got in her car and drove off. That night I called Garrison again. I told him what Hannah had brought. He told me to keep everything in a locked drawer and scan a digital backup just in case. Then he asked something he hadn't before. "Do you want to amend the trust?" "What do you mean?" "We can set it so that if Evan challenges you again, he forfeits his inheritance entirely. It's called a no contest clause." I thought about it, about the boxes in the attic, about Dean's name on that deed, about Hannah handing me those papers, her hand shaking just a little. "Yes," I said. "Let's do that." We filed the amendment 2 days later. It was simple, just 1 page added to the original trust. Any beneficiary who initiates legal action against the grantor shall be considered to have predeceased them and shall receive nothing from the estate. After that, the calls from Evan stopped. The emails slowed. By the end of the month, it was quiet again. I sat on the porch one evening with a cup of chamomile and a book in my lap. The roses had begun to fade, the edges of the petals curling inward. Autumn was coming. The shadows stretched longer now across the yard. I listened to the cicadas and the distant hum of a neighbor's mower, and I waited for whatever came next. The leaves turned quickly that year. By early October, the big maple out front had gone gold, and every breeze left a handful of crisp color on the porch steps. I'd started walking again just around the block. Slowly at first, holding Dean's old cane more for balance than necessity. The air felt different, somehow lighter. The house was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that presses on your chest. Just peace. A letter arrived from the clerk's office in mid-October, a stamped confirmation that the amended trust had been filed and recorded. Final. Binding. Evan never responded. I imagined he'd seen it, understood it, and decided to cut his losses. Or maybe Hannah had warned him. I didn't know. I didn't ask. Thanksgiving came, and for the first time in years, I hosted. Nothing fancy, just a few friends from church, a neighbor whose daughter was out of town, and Garrison who brought a store-bought pie and a bottle of cider. We ate at the big dining table Dean built himself. I set out the good plates, polished the silver, and folded the linen napkins into little fans. Someone lit candles, and someone else asked for a second helping of sweet potatoes. It wasn't a loud gathering, but there was laughter, and that was enough. One afternoon in December, I stood at the window, watching the birds scatter from the feeder. A familiar white sedan pulled into the driveway. I opened the door before she knocked. Hannah stood there holding a cardboard box. Her eyes looked clearer, steadier. "I found some of Dean's books in the garage," she said. "Figured you might want them." I stepped aside and let her in. She set the box down on the entry table. "I got a job in Houston," she said. "Library assistant at a middle school. It's not permanent, but it's something." I nodded. "I wanted to thank you," she said after a pause, "for not shutting me out. I didn't handle things well." I looked at her for a moment. "You showed up when it mattered," I said. "That counts." She smiled, small and genuine, then picked up her keys. Before she turned to leave, she glanced at the photo of Dean by the stairs. "He loved this house," she said. "I get it now." The door clicked shut behind her. That night, I sat by the fireplace and opened the box. Dean's books were all there, dog-eared, underlined, familiar. I ran my hand over the worn spine of his favorite one, a history of the Appalachian Trail marked with a napkin corner for a bookmark. I thought about everything we'd built in this house. Not just walls and windows, but a life. A life that had been threatened, picked apart, nearly rewritten. But it held. There's something quiet but powerful about standing your ground. About knowing who you are, what matters, and choosing not to be moved no matter how loud the wind gets. If you're still listening, thank you. And if you've ever had to fight for your name, your place, your peace, just know you're not alone. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Leave a comment if you feel like sharing. And if this story meant something to you, you can always subscribe for more. Until next time, take care of yourself and hold the line.